Imagine standing in a field on a cold December night and watching an entire battle rage in the sky above your head. Not an aerial dogfight, but two ghostly armies. Phantom cavalry charges, spectral infantry formations clashing, the thunder of ghostly cannon fire and the terrible cries of dying men, all playing out like some terrible vision from hell. This isn't a Halloween fiction. In the winter of 1642, villagers in Warwickshire claimed that they witnessed exactly this, night after night. Now, Britain has many haunted battlefields, but only one has ever been investigated by a royal commission, sent by the king himself. This is the story of the Battle of Edgehill in the English Civil War, and the ghostly battle that followed. To understand why this battlefield became so notorious for its hauntings, we need to understand the battle itself and the events that led to it. The Battle of Edgehill was fought in Warwickshire on the 23rd of October 1642. It was the first major battle of the English Civil War. By the summer of 1642, the relationship between King Charles I and his Parliament had completely broken down. Years of constitutional conflict over money, religion and royal prerogative had finally reached breaking point. Charles believed in the divine right of kings, that he ruled by God's will and was answerable to nobody but the Almighty. Parliament, increasingly dominated by Puritan gentry, believed that they held the purse strings and should have a say in how the kingdom was governed. On the 22nd of August 1642, Charles took an irreversible step. At Nottingham, he raised his royal standard, effectively declaring war on his own parliament. The country slowly slid into civil war. But Edgehill wasn't the first clash. That honour goes to the skirmish at Powick Bridge near Worcester in September. Edgehill, however, was the first major encounter, the first time the main field armies of the King and Parliament met in full battle array. Parliament in London had quickly assembled an army under Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, whilst Charles gathered his forces in the Midlands. By October, the King's army had assembled at Shrewsbury. Charles held a council of war with a crucial decision to make. Should he attack Essex's army at Worcester, or should he march on London, forcing Essex to pursue him? Charles chose the bolder course. He would advance on the capital, and if Essex gave chase, he would then turn and fight him at a place of his own choosing. Essex did indeed pursue him, and on Saturday the 22nd of October, the two armies found themselves in close proximity, near the village of Kinnerton in Warwickshire. The Royalists occupied the high ground on Edgehill, a prominent ridge that offered excellent tactical advantages. Sunday the 23rd of October 1642 dawned cold and clear. The Royalist army numbered about 14,000 men, whilst the Earl of Essex commanded approximately 15,000 parliamentarians. Now, these weren't the professional armies of later wars. They were a mixture of trained bands, which like militia, raw recruits and gentlemen volunteers, many of whom had never seen combat. It took all morning for the two armies to actually get into position. At around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the King's young nephew, Prince Rupert of the Rhine, led the Royalist cavalry down from the ridge in a thunderous charge. It was magnificent and disastrous in equal measure. Rupert's horsemen smashed through the parliamentarian cavalry and kept going, pursuing their fleeing enemies for miles, leaving the battlefield entirely. And without cavalry support, the Royalist infantry now found themselves having to take on the whole parliamentary army. The two infantry formations now clashed. This was warfare at its most brutal, men hacking at each other with swords, clubbing with musket butts, stabbing with pikes. As evening approached, both sides were exhausted. The King's infantry had performed well, but Rupert's cavalry had vanished on their wild pursuit and wouldn't return until nightfall. Essex's men had suffered heavily, but had held their position. And by dusk, both armies drew back, neither able to claim victory, Casualties were horrific. About 1,500 parliamentarian dead and wounded, and perhaps 1,000 royalists. Bodies littered the field, and many wounded men were left where they fell, facing a cold October night without succour. The battle was effectively a draw. Charles continued his march towards London, but he was checked at Turnham Green on the 13th of November, when the London trained bands turned out in force. The king was forced to retreat to Oxford, and what everyone had hoped would be a short war would drag on for years, claiming nearly 200,000 lives, 5% of the entire population. But our story doesn't end with the battle. In many ways, it begins there. Just before Christmas 1642, about 2 months after the battle, several shepherds were walking across the battlefield at night. Suddenly, they heard sounds that froze them in their tracks. The beating of drums, the clash of arms, and the terrible groans of dying men. And then, to their utter horror, they witnessed what can only be described as a replay of the battle itself, appearing as ghostly apparitions in the night sky above the battlefield. According to the accounts, the phantom battle lasted over 3 hours. The shepherds could see cavalry charges, infantry formations, and the flash of cannon fire, all accompanied by the sounds of warfare. And when it finally faded, the terrified shepherds ran to Kinnerton and reported what they'd seen to 2 notable local men, William Wood, a Justice of the Peace, and Samuel Marshall, the minister at Kinnerton. Now, here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary, because Wood and Marshall didn't dismiss the shepherds' account as hysteria or wild imagination. Instead, they decided to investigate it themselves. The following Saturday night, and this is recorded in contemporary documents, Wood, Marshall, and several other local gentlemen went to the battlefield to see for themselves. And according to the pamphlet that was subsequently published, they witnessed exactly the same phenomenon. The ghostly battle appeared again, complete with all its terrible sounds and spectral participants. The account states that the apparitions appeared for several nights in succession. News of the hauntings reached King Charles at his headquarters in Oxford. Marshall himself travelled to Oxford to report the sightings directly. Charles's response was remarkable. He commissioned an official investigation. He appointed 6 gentlemen, led by Colonel Sir Edmund Warwickshire, to travel to Edgehill and conduct what we might call today a formal inquiry. Warwickshire was tasked, and I quote, to take a strict examination of the truth of the business. This commission arrived in January 1643. The commissioners interviewed the shepherds, Wood, Marshall, and others who claimed to have seen the apparitions. And then, and this is the most extraordinary part, the commissioners themselves claimed to have witnessed the phantom battle. In their report, they stated that they too saw the ghostly reenactment of Edgehill, and they could identify individual participants amongst the spectral armies. Among the ghostly figures, one stood out. Multiple witnesses, including the members of the Royal Commission, claimed that they could identify Sir Edmund Verney, the King's standard bearer. Sir Edmund Verney was Knight Marshal to Charles I, and held one of the most symbolic positions in the army. He was the bearer of the royal standard. At the Battle of Edgehill, Verney stood in the thick of the fighting, holding aloft the King's banner. As the parliamentary infantry broke through royalist lines, Verney found himself surrounded. Soldiers demanded that he surrender the standard. His response, according to legend, was, "My life is my own, but this standard is the King's, and I cannot surrender it." Reports claim that he cut down 16 attackers before he fell. And here's the detail that's echoed through history. When royalist cavalry later recovered the royal standard, Sir Edmund Verney's severed hand was still gripping the staff. They actually had to pry his dead fingers open to retrieve it. The rest of his body was never identified, one of many simply tossed into mass graves. or even left where they fell. On the 23rd of January 1643, a pamphlet was published in London with the remarkable title, A Great Wonder in Heaven, showing the late apparitions and prodigious noises of war and battles seen on Edgehill near Kennerton. This pamphlet detailed the entire story: the shepherd's initial sightings, the investigation by Wood and Marshall, the Royal Commission, and the Commissioner's own witness testimony. The pamphlet concluded that the apparitions were, quote, doubtlessly a sign of his wrath against this land for these civil wars, unquote. The phantom battles continued through December 1642 and January 1643. Night after night the spectral armies clashed above Edgehill. But then, according to tradition, something changed. The locals, horrified by the nightly displays and perhaps moved by conscience, finally organised proper burials for the fallen who still lay in the fields. Bodies that had been left where they fell for months were at last given a Christian burial. And once the dead were properly interred, the full-scale spectral battles ceased. It's a detail that many ghostly stories contain, the restless dead finding peace only when shown proper respect. Now, whether you believe in such things or not, the timing is remarkable. But that wasn't the end of the story. Reports from Edgehill have continued on and off for nearly 400 years. During the Second World War, soldiers stationed at a supply base near the battlefield, now MOD Kinnerton, reported hearing sounds of conflict: drums, shouting, the clash of steel. Now, one can only imagine how unsettling that must have been for men who themselves might be going into battle soon. In more recent decades, visitors have reported a variety of experiences. Some speak of sudden cold spots on warm days. Others claim to hear distant drums or the sound of marching feet. Many report an overwhelming sense of sadness or unease when walking across certain parts of the battlefield, particularly around the anniversary of the battle on October the 23rd. Some have even reported seeing full apparitions, soldiers in 17th century uniform, cavalry on horseback, figures moving through the fields where no one should have been. Over-vivid imaginations? Or something else? Well, I'll let you decide. The Great Wonder in Heaven document still exists, housed in the Public Records Office. And this has led to the claim that Edgehill is the only battlefield officially recognised as haunted by the Public Record Office, a government body. But here's the problem with that claim. The Public Record Office, which wasn't established until 1838, almost 200 years after the events at Edgehill, holds the document. That's all. They don't endorse the claims within it any more than they endorse any other document in their collection. What's true is this: that reports were taken so seriously at the time that a King of England sent a royal commission to investigate the hauntings in 1643. Now that's the only time this has ever happened. And that report is held in the Public Records Office, or the National Archives as it now is. So what are we to make of Edgehill? Was it a mass hallucination born from the trauma of civil war? Was it propaganda designed to suggest divine disapproval for the conflict? Or did something genuinely inexplicable happen on the battlefield in the winter of 1642? Edgehill is certainly unique, not because it's more haunted than Culloden or Marston Moor, but because someone in authority took the reports seriously enough to investigate and document them. And that document survives to this day. And of course, the battlefield itself remains too, a place where thousands of Englishmen fought and killed each other in a civil war that would shape Britain's future. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story that combines a bit of Halloween and ghostly stories with the English Civil War. Now, I'm planning more stories from the Civil War in the coming months, but in the meantime, you might enjoy this video. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to sharing more forgotten stories from British history with you very soon.